Alrighty. No, here it goes. So, of course, we all know that Seder is the highlight of everything. For many people, it's the highlight of the year. Really, it's one of the most celebrated holidays is Pesach, and many people have very fond memories of Pesach and of the things that you both that you may do on your own at home or that you remember growing up at your parents' home, your grandparents' home. And what's so beautiful about Judaism is that we have so many traditions that we do, and every family has their own traditions. When it comes to Pesach, there are so many of them, and which are all very beautiful. So I think that the Seder is a real family time, and it's a really special time as well. So, 1 second here. I'm just gonna. Looks like my Facebook here is working. Not. So let's get right into it. Now, there's a story that was just recently. Someone was recently telling me. You may have heard it before. There was the family that the father calls the son and tells him that it's been 50 years I'm married to your mom, and I've got too long with her, and I'm fed up. I don't want to get rid of her. I want a divorce. The son calls the sister. The sister says, "No way, that's not happening." Calls back the dad, says, "There's no way you're getting separated from mom. You've been together for too long." So she says, "Don't do anything. Wait till I come there. Me and my brother are coming right away, and we'll settle it all for you." He hangs up the phone, turns to his wife, and says, "Honey, the kids are coming over Passover, and they're paying for their own tickets." You may have heard this story, but the the truth is that this year, unfortunately, many people, whether you're going to pay for your ticket or your parents are going to pay for your ticket, many people are not going to make it to the status that they had thought they would make it to. So, but you think about our history and you think about the many Seders which have taken place in the most craziest of circumstances. It could have been going back, more recently, I would say, Nazi Germany or this former Soviet Union. These are places where, unbelievably, people had sacrificed their life and did whatever it took to have a Seder. It was unbelievable. So I really think that the Seder had so much meaning to our people, and I think because it's an expression of freedom, which our people always are seeking, that people have risked their lives to have the Seder and done whatever it took to participate in the Seder. So I think if we think about our history and the people that did that, it gives us also a little more hope, but it gives us a more of encouragement and saying, you know what, we may be a challenging time, but at the end of the day, we are in a time period which we're still safe at home, and we try to keep clean and safe that way. Now, there are people who think, if I couldn't have the Seder like I wanted to, maybe I should just cancel the Seder. But of course, like you said, you think about our ancestors and you think about so many years ago, but even more recently, just our grandparents or great-grandparents who really sacrificed everything to have the Seder. We should definitely do the same. Now, what's actually very reassuring is to think that not too long ago, or not too long ago, but the first, we are not the first quarantine Seder. The first Seder in history that ever took place was also a quarantine Seder, because the original Seder, which took place in Egypt, they were not allowed to leave their homes. Everyone had to stay at their home. There was no community Seders happening. There was no gatherings. It was only each person within their immediate family. No one else was able to come. So we find that actually the first Seder was the quarantine Seder, and hopefully this will be the last Seder before we have Mashiach, where we shouldn't feel too bad about it. And remember, our ancestors did the same. They all had to stay home. And today we're really just reenacting that original Seder, which was also in a quarantine setting at home. So it's a challenge, but let's live up to it. Okay, so now what is all about this Seder? We know about the Seder. Why make a Seder? A Seder is not just reenacting, it's not really just commemorating. People think, we're just remembering something special that happened many years ago. A Seder is not just a memory. A Seder is not just, oh, this happened so many years ago and we're remembering it. The Seder is a reenactment. We are reliving exactly what happened in our past. How do we relive it? So we know that the Torah is something which is eternal. The Torah is not something which was given thousands of years ago, and we have a history book which we like to read, and every Shabbos we read from that history, and it's beautiful. Some stories are nice, some stories are sad. The Torah is everlasting. And the word Torah comes from another Hebrew word, hora'ah, which means a lesson. So in essence, when we talk about taking the Torah and the traditions that we have and all the holidays that we do, all of those things are something which are meant for an eternal lesson for us forever. And the Torah is everlasting and our tradition is everlasting. So the same as with the Seder. The Seder is not a time just to remember something nice or remember a sad time and remember the happy times. The Seder is a time to relive it and to re-experience that. And part of the challenge is to see how we can relive slavery, how we can relive freedom throughout, which is in our nice dining rooms at home.
Hey, Moshe, can you ask everyone to mute before you keep, it's sort of hard to hear you because people, I think, who are not muted are interrupting you.
We're gonna mute everyone here. Hold on a second.
Okay, goodbye.
If everyone can mute themselves, you can do so as well. And if you have a question, you could always ask it in the chat box as well. So that's not a problem. Okay. So let's get back to the Seder night. So now, when we think about reliving a Seder, right? Reliving the experience of Egypt, the Exodus. Now, think about the things that happen in your life. Again, because the Seder is not just a technical thing you're doing. Okay, we have a Seder plate, we have the matzah, we got the wine. It's a little bit more. You got to live it. So what are we living? We have to think about ourselves, the things that we do. As an example, in things that are in our lives, and our last class that I did on Thursday, we talked a little bit about this, that there are things that we all do, and no one is really safe of this, that really enslave us. Things that we do not because we want to do, but because society is telling us to do it. Things that we do that we are limited, things that are blocking us from growing in life. And we have to think about those things, whether it's in our regular, mundane life, and of course, in our Jewish life in this context. What are the things that are restricting us? What are the societal pressures that are taking place that are kind of hindering us from growing in our Jewish life and in our life in general? So those are the things that we can do, and we think about that. That's how we are really in slavery in today's day and age, today's social media day and age. And we have to think in the Seder what we can do to experience that freedom, experience that element of doing something because it's the right thing to do, not because someone else wants me to do it or because society is telling me to do it. Let me see how I can grow in a positive way. And here's another sign of reassurance, because if we think about the fact that going back to Egypt, when they left slavery, how did they do it? They relied on God. Right? God needed to give them the ability and put his strong hand there to let them do it. So if God needed to help them there, God tells us the same way I helped you in Egypt, I'm helping you today. You have personal slavery. You have personal areas where you need to grow and you're being restricted. My hand is there the whole time with you. You just need to look at it and see it, but I'm there helping you, giving you that helping hand. Let's move right into the Seder. So what does the word Seder mean? Seder literally means an order. Okay? It means an order. There's a certain order of how things have to happen, etc. Now, you think about usually when you go to an event or how about a party, usually most things are, there may be a system of how things happen, but most things that we do when we go and attend our social life that we have are not really restricted. They're not like very specific. It's not like you have to eat X amount of food in this specific place in this specific way. We find that in the Seder there are very specific things of how we're supposed to do it in this specific way. This amount of food, and you recline or you eat it. You have 3 matzahs, the 4 cups of wine, and we're going to go through the details of that. But the Seder is different than something, and in general, mitzvahs are very different than sometimes another social event which you may participate in or gathering which you may be at. And, we do find similarities in our life, which we do see have also an element of very specific standards. Think about sports game that happens, or many other things that you can think about, which every detail matters, right? If someone's an inch off of the end zone, there's no touchdown, right? It's every little detail matters in when it comes to these things. And if you play ball, you play golf, or many other things you can think of, that the details matter. When you're building a home, when you're doing anything, you're making a renovation, the details matter. If something doesn't fit correctly and it's an inch off, it won't go in there. It's got to fit exactly through, and the details do matter. So when it comes to mitzvahs, it's not different than that either. Every detail that we have when it comes to our tradition of mitzvahs are there for a reason. And there are many details, and each one has something there special that it's meant to teach us. And there's a lot of meaning to those things that we may think, oh, it's just a random thing that we do. But no, we have to remember that the precise details are there for a reason, and they represent the different things, sometimes physically, sometimes deeper, and sometimes we don't really understand all of the reasons, but it's important to try to do as much as we can. Now, this year, many people won't be able to do the same major league Seder that they had planned. But we're going to go through the things that we could think about, and the special parts of the Seder that no matter where you are, you could be solo at home and have the same meaningful Seder as you would have had with your whole family and all your friends around at the same table. So there are three basic parts to the Seder that we want to focus on. And the first one is the matzah, right? We all know about the matzah. The second is wine, or as a you can use grape juice. They're both are equally good. And the third one is the Seder plate. Those are the three, the three basic proponents that make up the Seder table. And of course, the Seder meal. We're not going to forget all that, the gefilte fish and all the good food that you make. So let's start with the matzah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to eat matzah on the night of Pesach. Okay? What's the reason for the matzah? We all know the Jews were leaving Egypt. They left in a hurry. They didn't have time to do the full process of making their bread. It didn't have time to rise, and it was baked right away. So that process, we're reliving again and reminding ourselves of that. That's part of the reason of the matzah. Now, the matzah is very simple. It's only flour and water. Nothing more, nothing less. And a lot of the matzah that we have, there are many deeper meanings to the matzah, and we talked about them in the previous lessons. We're not going to get to all the deeper meaning of the matzah because it's going to take time to get to that, and we want to finish through our Seder today. But in order to have that full Seder plate, you have generally three matzahs, right? The three matzahs represent the different three statures within the Jewish community: the Kohen, the Levite, and the Israelite. Those are the three matzahs on the Seder plate. Now, being that it's a mitzvah for everyone to participate in the eating of the matzah, so it's important even though you may have that centerpiece of the Seder plate, it's important that everyone has enough matzah to eat for themselves to participate in the mitzvah. Now, there's actually a special tradition of eating not the matzah you may find in a grocery store, but getting shmura matzah, which means guarded matzah. Now, this matzah is very specific. It's hand-baked, and it was guarded from the time of harvest. It was very specifically how it was to ensure that it was done in the best standard possible, making sure no water got in contact with the flour. So that shmura matzah, which is circular, unlike the square matzah you may be used to, is a very special tradition to eat it because that was really the authentic matzah that they ate thousands of years ago when they left Egypt. So many try to specifically eat that matzah. And if you would like some of that and you're in Akron, you can reach out and we will make sure you got it if you don't have so already. We have given out many matzahs so far, and we have a lot more to give out. So if you need, feel free to let us know, and we'll make sure you get some for your Seder. Now, I actually wanted to share a little video because this video is about baking of the matzah. And let me just pull this up here. There it is. And it's a 2-minute video, and I think you would appreciate seeing this. It's how they bake the matzah, and it's pretty cool how they do it. Okay. I'm not sure if you're able to hear. There was no sound in that. There was just a little background music. So if you didn't hear anything, don't worry. It was not. You didn't miss anything on that as well. Okay, so that's I always find it intriguing to see how they make the matzah, because they have to make it within 18 minutes, and they usually make it within just several minutes each matzah. And it's the oven that they bake the matzah in is in a 2,000-degree oven. It's really hot. It's got to bake. It's 20 seconds in the oven and it's out and done and baked. So it's pretty cool. So now we'll get to, so we have the matzah, now we have the wine. The wine, we have 4 cups of wine, as we know, that we drink throughout the Seder. You know, every holiday meal, every Shabbos meal, what do? We sanctify it with a cup of wine. Wine is a very special drink. It's a very prominent drink. And when we start off the meal, we always want to start off with prominence, and we sanctify it, and we use a cup of wine to do so. So our sages told us that by the Seder we want 4 cups of wine. And one of the basic reasons for the 4 cups is to remember 4 different expressions of freedom which God had told to the Jewish people that he's going to free the Jewish people. So here we see we have 4 cups of wine, we have 3 matzahs. Now there was something interesting which I want to share about the matzah and wine. One of the things, we have so many things of the numbers, 4 matzahs, 3 wine, we have different 4s and 3s. 4 matzahs, one of the things that the 4 cups of wine, one of the things that we learn about it is that it represents the 4 mothers, right? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. We have the 3 fathers, the 3 matzahs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And I read an interesting thought about this, that the matzah is representation of the men and the wine is representation of the woman. Because for a man to really experience true liberty and true freedom, they have to be like the matzah. They have to flatten themselves, be like that matzah. The bread represents ego, it represents being full of yourself. The matzah is about taking down from yourself and being less of yourself. And for a man to really experience freedom, they have to make themselves less of themselves and look at the other person to really experience that freedom. For a woman, it's really the opposite. Wine, what's the specialty of wine? Wine is you take a grape and you crush it and you reveal that special drink that's behind it that can be very expensive and very, it's a very sophisticated flavors. For a woman, in order to express her true freedom is by digging deep down inside of her and pulling out from inside the depths of her. So just a little thought about that may be applicable over here as well. And again, you look about the matzah. Matzah is a very simple flavor. Wine is a very sophisticated flavor. And you think about Judaism, which we have really a mix of both. Some things are very sophisticated, very flavorful. We see it, we understand it. Some things are very simple. We may not realize or see the deeper meaning behind it. Both of them is what we want and God wants us to do. He wants us to have both the sophisticated, the flavorful, and even the simple tasting. He wants us to have a mix of both. Okay, now let's go to the Seder plates. So I'm going to share with you my screen here so we can see our Seder plate here. Okay, so here we have it. We have our Seder plate. And you see here there's different elements on the Seder plate, including the ones we may know. You look in the top, you have the beitza, the egg, you have the karpas, you have the chazeret, the charoset, the maror, and the zerah. We're going to go through and tackle each one of these. So we're going to start with the beitza right here, the egg, which is on top left. There are 2 cooked foods on the Seder plates, namely the egg and the shank bone, the zeroah. Both of them are representation of the sacrifices and offerings that were brought. The Paschal lamb offering and the Chagiga, the festival offering, which was their cattle or sheep. And we use an egg to represent this. An egg is round; it represents the cycle of life. We hear, cycle of life is the good times. It's the sad times, and the times of mourning. Egg sometimes we learn represents the concept of mourning. The Jewish people actually are connected to an egg very specifically because an egg initially is very soft, but the more you cook it, the harder it becomes. Our Jewish people, the more we were persecuted, the stronger we became and the tougher we became, and that's our history. And we stay strong no matter what, and we get stronger when people try to take us away. Now the egg is eaten. You don't have to eat the egg, but it's customary to eat the egg at the beginning of the meal section of the Seder. Right at the beginning, you dip it in salt water, and we'll get to that soon. The other cooked element of the Seder plate is the zeroa, the shank bone. Some people use it's really any roasted piece of meat or poultry. It doesn't have to be a shank bone specifically. It can be a chicken leg or wing. Some people use the chicken neck for it. Either way, the zeroa though is customarily not eaten at the Seder, even though it is on the Seder plates. Okay, then we have the maror, and you see here there's two things that look very similar on this plate. The charazeret and the maror, both of them are actually the same. They're both consisting of the maror ingredients. The reason why there's two is because we use it twice during the Seder. The first time is when we eat the maror, and the second time is when we have the sandwich of the Hillel sandwich, which consists also of the maror. What is the maror consist of? The maror, there's different ingredients that could be used for maror, and the primary two that are used generally are romaine lettuce and horseradish, right? Ground horseradish. In Chabad, actually, the custom is to use both, and you can see here in the picture you have the piece of lettuce, so that's what it's supposed to be looking like, and on top of it the shredded horseradish, freshly ground. And why romaine lettuce? Well, romaine lettuce is not usually bitter, but the truth is that if you leave romaine unharvested, it does become very bitter, and it really is representation of the story of Egypt. Initially they came to Egypt, everything was sweet, everything was fine, it seemed to be good, and as the time went on, it became more bitter because they became enslaved. So we see over there how important. Another thing, the reason why the romaine lettuce can be representation of the maror. Okay, then we have the charoset. This is a favorite of many. You have the charoset is a mixture, a pasty sweet mixture, which consists of, this is a different traditions that people like to do: apples, pears, nuts, dates, many different things that we use. People use pomegranates, almonds, cinnamon, many different ingredients that people use. In our family, the custom is to use simply apples, pears, and nuts, and a little bit of wine. But again, each person does based on the way their tradition is, how they like to make it. Many different recipes for that. Later on in the Seder, the maror is actually dipped into the charoset, and the charoset is a representation of the mortar that the Jews had to use to, to build the brick for the bricks that they had to build in the times of slavery. And finally, we have the karpas. The karpas in this picture is an onion, but many use different things. You can use celery. Any vegetable is really fine. Many use celery, parsley, potatoes. In our family, again, the custom is to use an onion, but you can use whatever you would like. And by the way, I have this document over here. Goes through the Seder. I'm going to email it to any, or I'm going to share it later on for all those who would like it. You can see that as well later to utilize for your Seder if you want. Okay. So when do you have the Seder? So many people, especially if you have little children at home, you want to have it at an earlier time when children are awake. It's really important to remember that it's best to have the Seder at the time when the holiday starts at the same time. There's a real spiritual energy. When Shabbos starts, there's a spiritual energy of Shabbos. When the holiday starts, there's a special spiritual energy of the holiday. And for Pesach and for Passover, for the Seder night, which is on the 15th of the month of Nisan, it's a very special time, and therefore you want to try to do it at the right time. When is that? The 15th of Nisan is is going to be Wednesday night, and Wednesday night in Akron at least, nightfall, which is again when we always start. The Jewish calendar always starts at night, right? The night precedes the day. In the story of Egypt, the exile preceded the freedom. Night preceded the day. So we start in the evening, just like Friday night we do. So on Wednesday night at about close to 8:30 is when nightfall really is. So if someone needs to start a little earlier, it's best to do some of the readings maybe before. You want to eat the matzah and drink the wine and do the kiddush specifically. If try to make it happen at night when it's past nightfall, which is again in Akron about 8:25. Okay, let's get to the actual Seder, and there's many different steps. You start off the evening with, many people want to reflect a little bit at the beginning, but we start off with the lighting of the candles. The holiday candles brings in a special, it's very, very peaceful element to the holiday table, and this is a special mitzvah of the women who light and girls who light the Shabbat and holiday candles. There's a special blessing for that, as you may know, or you can look in your Haggadah for that. Then we make Kiddush, right? We have the Kiddush. Again, we start off sanctifying the meal with wine. We start off with something holy. How do you do the Kiddush? Kiddush is supposed to be on a cup about 3.5 ounces big. So if you have a teeny, better not to make it on a little shot glass. You want to use a cup. And many people, you may notice here at Shul, when we make the Kiddush, I fill it up to the top and it flows over the top. Now, you don't have to make it flowing, but the reason for it to flow, over is because you want to show, if the whole purpose of Kiddush is blessing and sanctification, we want to have an overflow of blessing. Now, someone is asking about candle lighting time. Candle lighting time is at about 7:40-ish, and nightfall is at 8:25. Again, appropriate time to start the Seder is around then, and to get to the Kiddush at the 8:25 mark is most appropriate if possible. Now, and usually what happens is, especially if the services, you light the candles and you start services, and then you start the Seder, which is usually what happens between the candle lighting and the Seder. After you make the Kiddush, you drink the wine. How do you drink it? You're supposed to lean. Leaning is, again, a representation of freedom. Why? Back in the day, the kings and nobles would usually, they would eat on these big couches and pillows, and they would lean. So it's a special tradition to lean when we drink the cup of wine, to show that freedom that we are representing. Okay, you drink the wine, and then you move to the next one. The next thing is the karpas, or the washing of the hand before the karpas, which is the vegetable. So you have orchatz and karpas, which is you wash your hands 3 times on your right, 3 times on your left, and you do not make a blessing. Contrary to when we wash our hands for hamotzi, over here you do not wash your hands. You do not make a blessing. And then what do? You take up the vegetable that you have on your Seder plate. Again, the celery, the parsley, the potato, the onion. You dip it into salt water, you make the blessing of the vegetable, and you eat it. This is a very odd thing. I mean, we know why we're dipping into salt water, the tears of the Jewish people, but the washing, and the dipping of this vegetable, why are we doing this random act? And the reason is because it's random. We are doing this specifically because it's random. Our sages wanted us to do random things at the Seder. In this case, the dipping of the vegetable, in order to pique the curiosity of the children, because we want to make sure the children are attentive and are following alongside the Seder. We don't want it to be boring for them. We want the children to ask why. Judaism, as much as we have a very strong tradition, and we have a very strong set of rules and laws and this and traditions, together with that, Judaism embraces very strongly the asking of questions, and we want people to ask questions, and we want people to especially the children who that's the ultimate of where the education starts from, to learn how to ask and to want to understand. Not everything they will understand, and we used to always ask my father. Kids always love asking why, and I remember whenever we would ask my father why, he would always say, "Because I love you," and he would never answer us. But not always do you know the reason, but it's important to ask and strive to understand, and many times we will understand when we ask. So in order to keep the children awake, and especially because soon they're going to have to say the 4 questions, it's important to keep them asking questions and keep their curiosity very awake. And on a side note, it's really important that this really teaches us in general about children. Sometimes it's important to find creative ways how to interact with the children and to get them to be involved, and not necessarily just shove something down them. We want to make sure that we find creative ways to get them involved. Okay, then after we have the karpas, we have the salt water, now we have the yachas. We break the matzah. You have the 3 matzahs we mentioned. You take the middle one, you break it in half. What do you do with the 2 pieces? Again, the matzah is considered the poor man's bread, right? It's a very simple dough, reminding us of what they had to do when they left Egypt. And as a poor man would do, you eat a little bit now, you save a lot for later. So you take the small piece, you leave it for now, you break the bigger piece, and you save it for later. What are we saving it for? The afikoman. The afikoman, which literally means dessert, we save it for the end of the meal. Some people have a custom of hiding it, and the children have to find it, or some people, the children steal it, and then the parents have to find it, and they redeem it. Whatever you may do, again, this is another thing to get the children involved. Some people don't like the children to steal it specifically, but whatever you may do, we find ways to get the children involved over here. So we leave the matzah to the end, that bigger piece. Now we begin the reading of the story, and this is a very important part of the Seder. We are retelling the story and trying to relive that experience. We fill up a cup of wine. There are certain in the Haggadah, if you have one, it'll tell you which sections that you hold the cup of wine, and over here you start speaking about the story. We begin with the 4 questions, and by the way, all these things that we do, even when they're meant for children to or specifically to help the children, we do them as well, even as adults. Sometimes we may be children at heart, or we all can always learn the same lessons that children can. So we also have to ask the 4 questions, even if there are no children at the table. So today, in this year, which many people may not have children at the table, don't worry. You still say the 4 questions. You still have the questions and answers that will be recited in the Haggadah. Okay, so you have the 4 questions. Again, you ask the 4 questions are asking why this night is different, why we do different observances, and then we move on to explain why we do so. And we go through the story. And there are some long texts, there's some shorter parts. If you can't say them all, you could say some selected ones. I'm going to share a document which has the selected ones, which are most important. I think we include different songs in this part about the Dayenu song, the Hisha Amda, many are familiar with, and different songs which are basically commentary and going through summarizing the narrative of what happened at the Exodus of Egypt. In general, during the whole time when we read the story, one of the most important things we try to do is to think and reflect about how it could have meaning to us personally. So we don't just want to say, oh, let's read a story which happened in our history, but we want to see how it's relevant to us today, and try to think how the message of Exodus, how the message of freedom can relate to us. As I mentioned in the beginning, what can we do to have that Seder and make it more relevant to our lives and make it more personal, and how we could free ourselves from the limitations and obstacles which may be in front of us, again, in our personal lives and, of course, in our Jewish lives. And that's really what the message of the story is trying to teach us, and we should really reflect on that. So it's a good time to ask at the table, that everyone should go around and think of something. They may not want to share everything, but everyone can share something about a personal obstacle which either they have bypassed or one that they hope to in the upcoming year. And that's a really important part of the Seder, to make it relevant to your personal life and not just read about some nice ancient story which happened. And then we recount the 10 plagues and the miracles which happened. And the 10 plagues, when we read it, people, you take the little bit of the wine, you pour it out. When we talk about the afflictions that God put onto our enemy, even though it may have been our enemy and they may have deserved what God punished them with, we still want to pour out some wine to show that we are not happy when people are being punished, even if they are deserving to. It's all done with compassion. And so even though we agree that they were deserving of the punishment based on how they treated the Jewish people, we still are showing that by pouring out that wine. We now drink the second cup of wine. And again, we lean as we did on the first cup of wine. Now we get to the matzah. We wash our hands for hamotzi, just like we would when we eat the challah, and we make two blessings. The first blessing is the hamotzi, because you're eating a bread-like substance, and the second one is the blessing which we are reciting to remember the mitzvah that God gave us, or to recognize the mitzvah that God gave us to eat matzah. When we eat the matzah, we recline. And we try to eat a nice amount of matzah, actually. It's not just a little nibble. You want to eat, when we talk about those big shmur matzahs, and I'll put it in relative to that, a half of that matzah is, I guess, the most proper to try to eat. And you try to eat as much as you could in that amount. Again, that's considered the size of a portion, and therefore we try to eat a full portion of matzah. Now, there are people which always are asking me why we wash hands. We always have these different washings we do for the hamotzi. In the morning we wash, different times we wash. We did so before by the karpas. In general, most of the things that we do and most of human activity is done through our hands. So if things are done through our hands, it's very important. And of course, in today's day and age, and in light of what's going on now, we need to make sure our hands are always clean in a physical sense. But in Judaism, we want to make sure our hands are ritually clean, and the washing of the hands is symbolic of that. So it's not, you're not washing to have clean physical hands, but it's symbolic of a spiritual cleansing to make sure that whatever we're doing, which is the most dominant things that we do is with our hands, we want to make sure that we are doing them for the right reasons and we're doing good with our hands. So we want to make sure we're clean when we do that. We want to make sure we're pure when we do that. So we wash our hands to do so. After the matzah, we have maror. We have the maror, which again, as I mentioned before, is that lettuce, horseradish. You can eat one, you can eat the other. We eat both together at our house. So we have a piece of lettuce. You put some grated horseradish inside, and you fold it over. And this you dip into the charoset. Here's when you eat the delicious charoset. Many like to eat a lot of the charoset. And my family, the custom is to eat only a very little amount. And here's you make the blessing of the maror and the blessing of that mitzvah of eating the maror. And we don't recline here. We're eating something bitter, not representing really the freedom here. Although you should know that the fact that we do have maror is not just, remembering bitterness, but the maror actually helps highlight the freedom. How so? In general, we know that whenever there's negative and positive, when we see the negative, it highlights how good the positive is. Not that we want the negative to be there, but it helps us and it puts it in perspective. So over here too, when we have the maror, it helps highlight the freedom. It helps highlight the positive elements, and it helps us appreciate the freedom and the blessings that God gave us. So we had matzah, we ate the matzah, we ate the maror, and then we have the sandwich, which is a mix of the matzah and maror. You take another piece of matzah, you have the maror in between. Again, we had 2 marors on the Seder plate for this reason, so you can have the double for the 2 different parts, and that's when you eat the maror. After you're done matzah, maror, the sandwich, and by the way, this is the first sandwich ever recorded in history, so we can take credit for the sandwich. After this, of course, is the delicious meal. And this is the part everyone's been waiting for. You know the story of the guy, the 2 beggars who were in town. One was Jewish, one was not, and they were talking together, and it was coming close to Pesach, and the Jewish fellow was telling his non-Jewish guy that I'm gonna go eat, have a delicious meal tomorrow night because I'm gonna eat by someone's house. He says, how do you do that? He's like, well, if you stand next to the synagogue, when people leave, they invite guests, and they always invite the poor people in town to come to different houses. So he's like, well, can I join? I'm not Jewish. He's like, of course, pretend you're Jewish. No one will know the difference. No big deal. He comes, they go to the synagogue, and he pretends he's Jewish. Someone invites him. He says, do you have where to go for the Seder? He says, no. Someone invites him home. They're invited to do different homes, so he's worried maybe I won't know what to do. He comes in. It's a beautiful home. He smells the delicious food. He is excited. He hadn't eaten a good meal in a few days. And they start, and they bring out the wine. They make the kiddush. Wine is great. It's delicious. I mean, on an empty stomach, wine is always not the best. It hits your head really hard. All right. And they move on, and then they start reading. And they start reading more, and they start reading more, and he's getting bored, and he's getting his stomach. He smells all that food, and he really wants to eat. Then they bring out the matzah. Now, the matzah, even though some people like it, it's a little cardboard-like. And he's like, what is this? This is a fancy home. Why are they bringing this? This is the stuff I would eat, crackers, when I don't have much to eat. And then they bring the maror. And he says, okay, this is just a test. They're trying to see. And they may know that I'm not Jewish. And he sees the maror. He thinks it's a piece of lettuce. He bites into a big piece, and he didn't realize there's a lot of horseradish inside. And he says, okay, guys, I admit I'm not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. And he runs out. And the next day he meets his friend, and his friend says, what happened? He says, well, you tricked me. You told them that I wasn't Jewish. They knew it all the whole time. So his friend says, he tells him what happened. He's like, oh, you fool. You would have waited another 1 minute, and you would have had that delicious meal. You missed it by 1 minute. And this was part of the tradition. So now we finally reach the meal, the delicious meal. You can have a 3-course meal, a 4-course, however many courses you want, and with the gefilte fish, the brisket, the meat, the chicken, whatever you want to make. And one thing that's important is I forgot to mention, some people eat the egg on the Seder plate at this point in the beginning of the meal. You dip it in salt water and you eat it. This is a time when many will sing songs, all the different customary songs. You sing the Chad Gadya or whatever you want. Some people leave it to the end. Some people sing it in the middle of the meal. And save room for dessert, not your regular dessert, but the afikoman. Right? This is the time when you got to eat the afikoman. The afikoman, I mentioned this in a recent class. The afikoman represents the offering, is also representation of the Passover offering, which was eaten at the end, after the whole meal was done, and it was specifically eaten at the end. Why? Because, and I'll just say basically, because I'm not going to get into the whole reasoning, but just simply the reason why they waited to the end was because God sometimes, in terms of the mitzvah of the Passover sacrifice, He wanted to say that there's sometimes when we do things because we enjoy it. Sometimes I want you to do it because this is a mitzvah. And even though a piece of meat that's roasted could be very delicious, God wanted us to do that mitzvah because of the mitzvah's sake, not just because we want to do it and because we're so hungry. He says, wait till the end of the meal, when you're not hungry anymore, when you don't want to eat anymore, and that's when I want you to do that mitzvah of eating the Passover sacrifice. So the afikoman represents that. So really the afikoman is the last thing that we eat during that meal part of the Seder, and you want to eat the afikoman last, and that's the last thing you eat in the meal. Okay, we are nearing the end of our Seder. After we just finished our meal. Now what we do when we're finished eating food, we thank God for it. The grace after meals. You fill up a cup of wine. We do the benching, the grace after meals with a cup of wine. And one more thing that you do before you make the blessing is you fill up another cup of wine besides for your own. Which cup of wine? Here's when you fill up the cup of Elijah. You fill up a big cup, a nice big cup, Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. Why Elijah the prophet? As the custom tells us, tradition tells us that Elijah the prophet comes to all of our Seders and participates. Why Elijah? Because Elijah is a representation of freedom and of, more specifically, redemption. Elijah will be the one who will be the one to announce when Mashiach comes. So he will be the one to announce the ultimate redemption. So when we talk about Elijah and we bring him to the Seder, our hope is that he's going to come to the Seder and announce to us the final redemption. And that's the 5th cup. We have 4 cups of wine, and Elijah's the 5th cup, the final redemption. The 4 cups is the regular cups that we drink. The 5th cup, which is Elijah, is the one of the final redemption. And we hope and pray that this year, actually, Elijah, the prophet, will come and will announce the final redemption to us at our Seder tables. Or even before, so we'd rather even before. Let it be today. Don't wait till the Seder. All right, we recite the grace after meals, and we drink the 3rd cup of wine, just like the others. We lean when we drink the cup of wine, and then you pour the 4th cup of wine. At this point, your head should be spinning a little bit, not too much. It's only wine, and you can use a little. If you need grape juice, you can use grape juice. They have very low percentage wine. If you like the Moscato wine, it's delicious. Other types of wine. If you need some, and you're in Akron, you're welcome to give us a ring or an email to Shul, and we can try to provide you with some kosher wine if you do not have any. After we drink the third cup of wine and you have the fourth cup of wine ready, at this point, we recite the Hallel. The Hallel is the praises to God, and we are thanking God for all the blessings and the miracles that He gives us. And we're not thanking God and praising God because God needs our praises. We're doing it because we need it to show God, and it's for us to show God that we are appreciative of Him. And we are also recognizing that the same God which had given us those blessings back in the day is still with us here today, the same strong hand with us, giving us the same strength today. We finally will drink the fourth cup of wine, or final cup of wine. You make the blessing, and then you say the special grace after drinking wine, and then L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. This is the famous proclamation we make at the end of the Seder. Not that we want to wait till next year, but that by next year's Seder, we're going to be already in Jerusalem, which means even today we'll be in Jerusalem. And that way, by next year's Seder, we're going to be in Jerusalem celebrating together, not in quarantine, together with the Jewish people, together with Mashiach. So let us, and by the way, we forgot, I don't want to forget to say this, but the second night Seder is a repeat. The same exact thing like we just went through today in this past hour, we're going to do again the second night. And the challenge is to see what you can do the second night, which you didn't do the first night. I guess you do all the same rituals, but what insights can you think about, or what meaning can you add to your personal life, which you didn't think about yesterday? And that is the challenge, which I will challenge you all. See what meaningful lessons you could learn the first night, and see what additional meaningful lessons you could apply to yourself and to the table the second night. Whether you're solo, whether you're with other people around at the table, the small family, or whoever you're with, remember you're not alone. Every Jewish person around the world who will be celebrating Pesach will be doing the same. And just like that first Pesach, we'll be celebrating it in quarantine, just like they did. So this year's quarantine should be the last one, and we should hopefully merit the coming of Mashiach. And we won't know of any sicknesses and any sadness, and only good news and positive and health and happiness to us all. So with that, we conclude our Seder lesson. Of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. And if you want, we do have like I said, the Seder little guide, which I will be sharing with those that would like it. And we will be emailing it out to the community for you to have if you'd like for that as a resource. So with that, we will conclude.
Thanks, Moshe.
Yes, of course. We'll see you. Have a happy Pesach.